today. So next up, we have Katherine Moyer and Carrie, Hellwig, Christopher with Hershner Hunter along the lines of how do I know when to get a lawyer involved. So I'll tee up your guys' presentation. Maybe stick with the smaller. Yes, perfect.
I can't carry the hard part. I have to say, I have not spoken to an actual room of people in 2 years. It's all been people on screens. So this is exciting, and I may not know how to talk to people in person.
Well, so we're with Hershner Hunter, and we are going to talk sort of generally about when you might want to get a lawyer involved with something, whether it's us or someone else. We found that a lot of small business owners haven't had a lot of experience with lawyers, and hopefully not in the divorce or criminal area either, which you don't practice in, but those, you may have experience there, but it doesn't necessarily translate into best utilizing a business attorney or a business law firm. Like Jill said, this is not intended to be legal advice, but because we're lawyers, we have to put an official notice on it.
So we're going to talk about how lawyers work with clients. You may have heard of both of these first things, right? Fixed fees or bill by the hour. So, there are some projects that lawyers can do for a fixed fee. Examples would be, entity formation, because it's such a fixed group of documents that you have to put together. I would say more often lawyers bill by the hour, because we end up in situations where we just don't know sort of all the issues that are going to arise in the documents we're going to need to put together. So for example, if we're helping a client negotiate a lease or the purchase of real estate, or you're in a dispute, hard to know exactly what's going to unfold there. And so sort of by default, I think, for want of a better way to do it, I would say most lawyers bill by the hour. So it's something that you can expect. Ask your lawyer how much they bill by the hour. Certainly people ask us for estimates, and I base that on sort of what I at least initially appreciate as the set of issues to be addressed, and, times my hourly rate. But just something to know going in, right? So that's a good question to ask people. And then specialization versus generalization. There are lots of lawyers in town who are sort of generalists and do lots of different kinds of work. That's not our philosophy. For example, at our firm, we specialize. Carrie and I specialize in business transactions. We have people in all sorts of different areas, whether that's litigation or estate planning or employment law. And our view is, you're best served really by someone who's specialized in a particular area, whatever area it is that you need help in, because that person really has in-depth knowledge and experience in that area. And so I think you're going to be better served probably if you go to someone who specializes in the area that you need help in.
So we wanted to talk about some myths about attorneys.
I know, and thank you, Jill.
Jill cleared some of this up. But
we didn't even talk before.
No. So sometimes people think that they can come to an attorney and like sort of get the document blessed. And that is not something that attorneys really like to do, because usually, so your situation is always unique, and usually whatever document it is, whether it's a form or something that was crafted by the other party to the transaction, probably doesn't protect you the way that it should. And so what we want to do is review it, think it through, and give you advice on what your options are in terms of responding or getting the issue resolved. Also, there is not a form for everything for the same reasons I just mentioned, which is your situation is unique. And we have templates and forms to start with, but sometimes the best place to start is some other deal document that we have that we're going to modify for you, because it's actually much more specific, much more like your situation than, say, our base form. Another thing that's really important to understand is it takes longer to review a contract than you might think. And sometimes it's harder to fix a contract that's short than a contract that's long. A lot of times short contracts are missing all the things that protect you because the other side's lawyer was crafty and intentionally drafted it in a way that seems friendly, but has no meat. And then we already talked about the fact that Google does not practice law, just like Google does not practice medicine. So you can Google to get general basic information, but do not think that Google will be able to identify what your actual legal issues are, just like they can't diagnose your problem. Or if they do, you have cancer every time. That is true. That's great. Actually, Twitter's better because it's shorter. So, and the other thing is that if there is a form, it's not very efficient for you to bring a form to the attorney to use. It's better for the attorney to suggest a form from their form bank as a starting point only.
Right, and I know it's counterintuitive because people think, but I've already drafted this thing, right? I got something from Google, I modified it to fit my situation. And so surely it's going to cost me less for a lawyer to just look at that. So back to, you know, we don't typically just bless forms. You know, it's counterintuitive, I realize, but I promise you that almost every time it's more efficient for you to go in, to tell your story to the lawyer that you're working with, and then have them start from a form or a template or the last deal they did that's close enough to yours that that's a good starting point, right? So they've already got some efficiency built in, and then they can customize it for you.
And that concept would apply to all of these areas. So Jill talked about initial business formation. Another thing that's very important for businesses of all sizes is thinking about consulting a lawyer in advance if there's likely to be a change in ownership in the business. Wait, this is your slide. I did the last one.
It's okay. There's one slide that we promised we each do, and I can't remember which one they are.
I'll remind you.
All right, remind yours. So, initial formation of a business for sure. Oh, you already talked about changing ownership of the business. Okay, I'll get to the next one. You know, lots of businesses that we work with are small businesses, right? They're family businesses or they're owned by just a few people. And so important to make sure that your estate plan really works with your business. So that's another area to contact a lawyer in. Employee issues, right? So an example that we put in here is an employee handbook, but I would say you start a business. So as Jill knows, we have a partner who works in employment law who says, you know, nobody goes into business to be an employer, right? We go into business to start our actual business. And then we realize, oh, actually we can't do everything ourselves. We might need some help. So when you hire your first employee, or frankly, before you hire your first employee, that's the time to call a lawyer, right? So they can help you get set up with policies, with the right way to hire someone. And so I think that's the time to get a lawyer involved. Certainly if you're buying or selling real estate or you're leasing real estate for your business, you know, good to talk to a lawyer. Intellectual property. So if you're not familiar with that term, right, we're talking about trademarks, copyrights, patents, trade secrets. Did I get them all?
Yes.
Or Carrie, who
specializes in IP. My area, but I gave her the slide. So,
so that's certainly an area to talk to a lawyer about. You know, I'm certain that Carrie's had clients who started the initial trademark registration process themselves. What I understand is it's not an entirely intuitive process, and so good to talk to someone before you do that. And then, although we're certainly hoping that you don't get into a dispute in the course of your business, you know, that's an area where for sure you're going to talk to a lawyer. And we have a whole group of litigators. We barely know what they do. I barely can find a courtroom, but you know, there are lots of litigators in town, and so if you get into a dispute, rather than if you get to the point where you just realize you can't resolve it on your own, that's time to get some legal advice. Oh, this is the one that's mine. All right, conflict checks. So, you know, we lawyers have certain ethics rules that we have to follow, and one of the big rules has to do with conflicts of interest. And what that means is those rules say we as lawyers, frankly, either a single lawyer or a law firm can't represent parties that are on opposite sides of something, right? So for example, let's say that you are buying real estate. We can't represent both the buyer and the seller. Or you're involved in a lawsuit. We can't represent both the plaintiff and the defendant. So the first thing, one of the first things the lawyer will ask you after you, introduce yourself and tell them about your business and the issues that you need help with is, tell us the other parties involved, right? So if you're negotiating a contract with someone, they'll ask, who's the other party to that contract? If you've got a lawsuit, who's the other party to the lawsuit? And if you are forming a business entity and you have a number of prospective business partners, they'll ask you for the names of all those partners. And the reason we do that is so we can run what's called a conflict check, right? We have a system, and everybody has a system in their firm where they can check to see if we've represented or we represent any of those other folks. Sometimes there are conflicts that can be waivable. So for example, we'll represent the buyer of real estate and we realize, actually, we represent the seller, not with this particular real estate sale, but we represent them on other matters. In that case, typically the conflict can be waived, right? We go to both parties, we explain the situation and say, if you're comfortable with the fact that we've represented the seller on other things, right? We say that to buyer, we say to the seller, if you're comfortable with the fact that we're going to represent the buyer in this transaction, then you can waive that conflict and we can go forward. There are other conflicts that aren't waivable, in which case, we'll explain that to you. But that's a requirement that we have to do up front to make sure that we can represent you. And then also that last point, please don't send your lawyer confidential information before we run that conflict check. We frankly don't want to have confidential information that perhaps we are not allowed to have. So tell us your situation. Tell us all the parties involved. We'll run the conflict check and get back to you as to whether or not we have an issue, right? And then we'll ask you for your information.
Okay, so, and I think Jill touched on this a little bit. We'll talk more. Communicating with your attorney, just some different aspects of that. And actually, Katherine talked about one of them too. So it's good for you to share your perspective on what your expectations are and your preferences for communicating. Like, I'd rather have phone calls, I'd rather do Zoom, I'd rather meet in person. And then also for the attorney to be able to communicate to you how they typically work so that you can find something that, well, first to see if you're compatible, and second to know each other's preferences. Then that includes asking questions about their availability to work on your project and how they typically respond to voicemails or questions that you have. Sometimes it can be more efficient if you ask a bunch of questions in a single email than if you ask a bunch of them kind of sporadically, because then the attorney can focus in the one spot and get back to you on everything. And turnaround time is sort of less about is the attorney overall available, but like what's their expectation of how long it's going to take to review a particular document or the back and forth, or if you're selling a business, like how long does that typically take and why? Those are good things to talk about up front. And then also, it's very common for an attorney, if they're not doing something on a fixed fee, or even if they are, to ask for a retainer. And a retainer in the business law world is more of, and litigation too, is more like first and last month's rent. We want to know that you can pay for this, and especially, if the price point is higher. And so a lot of times the retainer is used sort of to pay at the end, and you pay as you go. But it's fairly standard for a law firm to want a new client to, it's like a show of good faith in a way that you can pay. The other thing is asking for an estimate, which is really kind of trying to get an idea of what the project might cost. I said earlier, contracts always take longer to review than you're expecting. It's really the same with most legal issues, even a business formation, because typically, especially if there's multiple parties involved, as you're going through the process of forming it, you come up with new things that you want to work out or clarify amongst the parties, and then your operating agreement changes 5 times, and all of a sudden it's more expensive because it's become more complicated. But that's actually a good thing because you're dealing with all your issues up front. But it also means that your estimate will be wrong. So something to keep in mind.
And then what should you expect in terms of timing, right? So, our first suggestion is plan ahead. So I know one of our partners last week got a call from someone saying, I'm buying some real estate. I need to get back to the seller tomorrow. I've got the contract. Can you review it by tomorrow? And, at that moment, he had other deadlines and other promises he'd made to people. And so he couldn't, in fact, review it in one day. And And he also suspected maybe the client had had the contract more than just that one day, right? And so perhaps sat on it and thought they could do it themselves and then realized maybe they should get some legal help. So, you know, good to plan ahead. When you know that you've got a project coming up, that's the time to contact someone, maybe even before you have documents or before it's fully formed, because at least then you can have a conversation with that person, make sure that person can represent you, make sure you're a good match, right? And then they're sort of queued up to work with you. You know, all of us, I suspect, have projects in process when anyone calls us, right? I've made other commitments to people in a given week and promised, you know, something by Tuesday, another thing by Friday. That's not to say that sometimes we can't jump in and do something on a short timeline, but it's just good to remember, right? We've got other commitments. And so if you call us early, again, if you plan ahead and call us a little bit early, then we can kind of work you into the queue. And then I know I've also got that commitment that I'm about to make to someone, right? And I make sure to make my work around that. And then, oh, I guess that just, I don't really need to say that last one because I already covered it.
Okay. So we're going to go faster because I think everything's
right. I'm afraid we're running over time.
So, and the idea is that try to disclose everything up front to the attorney that you know in an organized fashion. Not providing information or holding it back doesn't save you money with an attorney. In fact, it usually costs you more because, and another thing is like I was saying about Google searching and identifying like what your issue is. Oftentimes, what your actual business goal is different than like the document you might think you need or someone has told you you need. And so if you share your business goals and the details with us, we can try to kind of troubleshoot to try to help figure out how we achieve the specific thing that you want to achieve. It just may not always be the way that you're thinking it's going to work. And that's part of why you hire us, is because we have the expertise to sort that out. And every client's circumstances are unique. So just like with taxes, if somebody says you get a tax break on X, Y, and Z, you got to go talk to your accountant about whether it applies to you and your situation. Same thing with legal work. It's hard for attorneys to review a document in the meeting if you don't share it with them in advance, because we usually have to spend a fair amount of time mulling over. Well, you'll get better work product from us if you give us a chance to look at it up front. And actually, we're not doing that bad. Did I skip two? Yeah, and
so we've also mentioned, I know Jill actually has already mentioned all of this, but we wanted to just point out other professionals that you need. And frankly, if you're starting a business, you might need all of those people before you ever call a lawyer, right? So an accountant, an insurance agent, a banker, those are all professionals who can help you with your business. You know, every business should have those folks. And again, if you're starting a business, frankly, those should be your calls before you call a lawyer to make sure that you're set up, you've got a bank account, you know, someone has helped you assess the risks involved with your business and helped you figure out what insurance you need, and certainly an accountant to help you do some tax planning and financial planning. Okay, so here's some action shots of our attorneys and the different businesses that we, like different industries that we work in, because that's fun. And then this is a list of all of our practice areas, which you can see. I don't have to list them all out, but like I said, we're a full service business law firm. And so our focus is on a lot of, our specialties reflect the issues that come up the most for our clients. And you'll note one of those up here is creditors' rights and bankruptcy. Because that, like, we can help go after people who aren't paying you. Or if you need to restructure.
Or if somebody files bankruptcy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Restructure. Usually, well, that's usually where you want to end up. But, yeah. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for letting us share this information with you today.
Yeah, and then also just to let you know, we have a handout on the table that are just some other tips about working with lawyers and when to get a lawyer involved. So we hope that's helpful as well. And again, thank you for having us. Yeah.